Thank you. Good morning, everyone. There are more people in the room that sounded. Okay, let's try again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
There we go. Thank you. Today, I will try to give you a non-technical overview of where we think artificial intelligence will move. It will have a set of very simple aspects to it on a set of very complex slides. Before I start off, I want you, as we go through the day, to keep 3 quotes in mind that in many ways will impact what you do. The first quote is, "This is a world now in which data is the source of what we do. Artificial intelligence is the combustion engine of that oil, which is data." And that will drive most decisions that you make from an executive perspective over the next many years. The second is that we have been used to thinking of technology budgets as belonging to the IT organization. And while the implementation of artificial intelligence will be dominated by the IT organization, we have to ask ourselves the question, and we will dive into that a little later, which is, how are we going to pay for this? Money matters, and therefore I think it is important now to start to think of the fact that because this is about productivity, because this is about extending the revenue of your organization or managing cost and risk, every budget is an AI budget. And that is somewhat different than what we have looked at in the past. And then the last thing is, let's envision a world in which we individually or collectively as a team, when we make a decision, that decision is always supported by artificial intelligence. Whether it is in business life or your personal life, it would be unwise of me to say the afterlife, but there is no doubt that this is an important aspect. So as you go through the day, keep this in mind, because this is also the North Star of what we are going to cover. Now, I'll cover 3 topics. Topic number 1, very short, which is we do need to look back, and we do need to look forward in terms of where this is going. Right? Because we do need the North Star, and in order to have a North Star here, we also need to know where we came from. The second thing that I will talk about is I'll give you 5 areas that you need to focus on now. Okay? And I say now, I'll give you the rest of the day off because I want you to stay here. But tomorrow morning, I want you to go back and actually ask yourself these 5 questions and what you're doing in these 5 areas. And then lastly, I think the real question for us all is, what do we do now? Right? I mean, the 5 things are things you have to think about and are important. You'll see that later. But what do we do now? And I want to give you 2 things, because the fewer things we have to do now, the better and easier it is. But it is under the banner of the following, which is stop talking, start doing AI. Because we have now spent 2 years discussing ethics, discussing technical capabilities. It can be done. And therefore, I think the question now is, what are you doing? Stop talking about it. I'm not going to say stop going to conferences because I want you here, but you need to start to do something in your business about this. So let's go into the first one. Let's first look back because we tend to think that everything happened in November of 2022. That's not really true, and then some people say, no, that's not true. It was actually 2017, because that was when the document around transformers were launched. But that's also not true. The first neural network and the term artificial intelligence is from the 1950s. Okay, so this is not new. And while most of you in this room will know that it is not new, there are a lot of business executives out there that think this is new, and I think it is important to have people understand where we came from and what we have learned. Because we've learned that, yes, we actually in the 50s and the 60s were exuberant about the potential of artificial intelligence just before we went into the AI winter, because we realized that the technical capabilities were not there. And gradually, things improve, and this is what we are seeing now. The accelerated change is unbelievable. It's only 6 months since ChatGPT 4 was released, and yesterday you saw the next version of that. And we're not talking about a little tweaking of an interface here. This is a substantial, massive change that has happened in just 6 months. So there's no doubt that we are seeing an acceleration of this, and essentially the two periods that are important to understand is first the initial period, then there was a lot of stuff happening in between, then we get in 2010s and 20s now, we're going to get an acceleration of innovation around artificial intelligence, which is then your job to implement. And so now what we can look into is an economic transformation. This is not just your average technology evolution and technology cycle. This has the potential of becoming something substantial. Now, we could fill the entire conference with the technical aspects of where this is going. We don't have time to do that, so I try to fill it into one slide. One, of course, is artificial intelligence is not only just large language models. You hopefully all know that. And so you can't just look at the breadth of artificial intelligence as being what we do with ChatGPT. It is, however, important to understand where that is going. Right now we're in this phase of, yes, there's the large models from the global providers, but most of us are thinking, okay, well, I don't like to be trained on data that isn't relevant to my industry. So that's why we're seeing very industry-focused environments. Or I don't like the ecosystem I operate in, I want to be able to control everything. I don't want to give things away. Or what is happening in some countries that go, okay, well, great that Google and OpenAI and Microsoft, all American companies, have a platform out there. But will our own culture get lost in this? And that's why some countries are launching national-based large language models that incorporate the data set of the nation and ultimately, therefore, incorporate the data set and cultures of a nation, which we could lose if everybody has the same data set in which things are trained on. Ultimately, we will get to a stage in which the LLM functionality is embedded in the entire application framework that we have. So our architecture will have LLMs embedded everywhere. That's LLMs. Now, with some of the other aspects of artificial intelligence, which in some industries have been something you've been working on over the course of the last few years, is we have predictive AI that are, at this stage, probably moving from pockets, islands of that, into something which is more specifically a question of it becoming pervasive. And ultimately, every piece of software that has the ability to incorporate that level of technology will do so at the very end of this time frame. So what we need to think of is probably the whole thing evolves in phases. The phase we're in right now, and for those of you that have been in technology, this will be no different than many other evolutions when it comes to sort of the technology, is the technology comes out, and then everybody goes, oh, this is really important. I'm going to add it on to my product. And that's what's happening now. There is no software vendor out there that doesn't, well, only if they want to die, they will not talk about AI, but they will all talk about AI and how it's added to their product set. Ultimately, what happens is the architecture componentizes and becomes autonomous in terms of the structure of the overall architecture. That AI component becomes embedded in every aspect of what we do. And so the next version of software that may, in fact, unseat Some of the existing large-scale providers will be software where the design started with artificial intelligence, and ultimately that's how you built the software. And that will cause some disruption in the software industry, and it becomes therefore really important for you to ensure that your purchasing department knows about what artificial intelligence will do to the applications you purchase, because they often are part of the decision process of what to buy. So that's where we're going at an incredibly high simplistic level. Again, as I said, we could fill an entire conference with that. Let's then look at the scaling aspect. But before I go into the slides, this is... So I was an analyst in Gartner, as some of you know, for many years. And the traditional way in which researchers and also consultants work is you spend a lot of time gathering data, and then you sit down and actually analyze that data as a human being. Those days are gone. And what you will see here is a result of something that is completely different than the way I've traditionally been able to work, which is it is a survey, but the survey was done in a different way. It was a bunch of people that went out and talked to senior executives in Europe and in the US, so just to be transparent on where the data comes from. And they asked 5 questions. But the way they recorded those questions was all audio recordings. They were then translated automatically. They were then loaded into a spreadsheet, ensured that it was structured the right way. They were then loaded into, with a set of very specific prompts, into ChatGPT-4. And what you will see now are maturity models, are rankings of things that are important to executives, all based on a half-an-hour conversation with somebody in which you can then reach results far faster. We're talking months than what a normal analyst would be able to do. And so the first thing that the survey, which is about 300 organizations and very senior executives, so C-level executives, came out with is, okay, well, these are our concerns. And so these probably mirror the concerns in your organization. I then, I kind of get that, this may hallucinate a bit, and it did require a bit of work, but ultimately what you can say is there are 5 things that are important to address in every organization right now. And we'll talk about those 5 in the next 5 slides. Because the question is, what are you doing about these? To my notion that we should stop talking and start doing, okay? So let's first look at risk, the first thing that came up in the survey. So the experience of companies regarding how you address AI risk is actually pretty good when you looked at these companies responding. Now, you will also see that for many companies, risk is not just the risk of the technology. It is the impact of the technology, the risk on talent, the risk on culture, the risk that is in budget, the unknown aspects of this that we have. So there's no doubt that we need to do something about that in our organization. And so some of you may be doing this, but I'd recommend at least 3 things. You look at developing an AI risk framework, because you cannot assign this to one person. There are many executives that will be involved in this, so you have to have a framework for how you approach it in your organization. You need to start to do a review of technology providers, because the providers that underpin your architecture and make your business function today, they have suddenly experienced a higher degree of risk in some of the things they do. And also there may be opportunity in this. If all the professional service organizations are more productive because of using AI tools in the coding environments that they have, shouldn't some of that productivity gain flow to you as the customer? So therefore, shouldn't you get contracts with them that is cheaper than what you pay now if they start to use artificial intelligence for productivity purposes? And then the last thing is, you have to start to now think about what are you going to say when something goes wrong? What are you going to say to customers? What are you going to say to suppliers? And what are you going to say to your employees? Because you don't have time once something has gone wrong. You all know this. This is no different than the reaction time you need to have when you also look at cybersecurity, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to think differently about data. And this is a huge topic, but at least a few things that I think you as professional executives in technology, you may know this, but we need to be able to better communicate this to business executives. Because unstructured data is now workable and an asset. We have spent 50 years taking unstructured data as a human being and typing it into a structured environment and then doing something with it. That's suddenly gone. And if you can get business executives to see this, you will see that this opens up enormous possibilities. So we really need to start to think about a system of information layer that underpins your business. And for that, and we'll talk about that a little later in one of the subsequent slides here, is we need to think differently about talent that we need in the organization to actually succeed with this. And there are a large number of different roles that will pop up. So start to look at how you get those right people in. Understand how things are doing in your industry, because industries will be different. And start thinking about how you develop internal competencies, because you're not going to be able to hire everybody. That will just create even more wage inflation than you have now because of demands for a scarce resource that exists. So we need to start to think differently, which is why HR in your company, in your business, is incredibly important in this. They need to step up and actually get involved in the transformation that happens. And the third slide here is actually why they need to do this. This is something that touches on us as human beings, what we do, in some ways who we are and how we define ourselves. And so that impacts the organization's culture. And so the way you think, your culture will change as a result of that. Now, I'm not a culture expert, okay? So don't ask me specific details on it, but I do think that there's at least 3 things that are important for us to consider, because culture is about values, culture is about practices, and culture is about mindset. Each of these change. So the question is, you need to start to have somebody own what happens with your culture. Because we know from previous technology transformations that human beings evolve slower than the technology. And human beings act according to the culture, and therefore we need to think about how we address that. Then, fourth, money. This is my personal one worry, which is if you look at the amount of money spent by Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, Meta, Amazon, I mean, we're getting close to $1 trillion. Somebody is going to have to pay for that, okay? And, you know, you can lend somebody $1 trillion, maybe for 5 years, but then you want it back. And so we have to kind of start to think about, and certainly the technology providers have to think about, so where are the pockets that need this now so that we can start to tap into the budget? Because it's not only the IT budget that will drive this. I can tell you that. Because IT spending grows about 4% globally every year, so it's not going to be able to pay for all of this. So the budget has to come from addressing these 6 reasons for AI adoption. And that's why I say every budget is an AI budget. Now, the reason is that if you improve productivity, you can actually maybe hire less people, or get people to do different things that you've been wanting them to do. Decision-making and innovation increases, enhanced customer and employee support. There's a large number of different things that are positive economic factors that will help pay for this, but we need to start to work on that as well. And then we get to the last one, which is talent. And there are two worlds. It's kind of a tale of two cities on talent. Because there's talent, which is the technical talent. That's all these different roles. These are very standard roles now in companies that have really scaled the usage of AI. They have many of these. But the other aspect is every other person in your organization, they will have to think differently about what is the role they do and the tasks that they do. And that's why, I'm sure all of you have heard this, but for those of you that have kids, get them to think about doing critical thinking. Because these models are probably asymptotically going to be perfect. So there's always a need for an interpretation, but we need to train ourselves and the next generation on things like critical thinking. And so employees that are good at that are valuable for you in the world we move into. There's a large number of other, and when you get the slides, you can dive into the slide in more detail because you can enlarge it. But there's a lot of other skill sets that are important for us as we move forward. We do all that. We do need to do one other thing, though. So I said there was 5, but I kind of kept a 6th one to just say, and this is what Digitopia does, is if you don't know where you stand, how are you able to know which direction to move in? And so with Digitopia, there is now an AI maturity model. And it is able, therefore, to assess where you stand on the aspects that are important to AI maturity, which is obviously a subset of digital maturity, right? But it is an important thing to be focused on because your business today has probably the board or the C-suite focused on what do we do with AI. And therefore, these 5 things plus, let's get a status of where we stand, I believe is really, really important as we move forward. Last 2 things, and then I'll shut up. Okay? So, these are the 2 things I want you to go back and do. Because if you agree with me that we should stop talking, I mean, we should still explore this because it evolves, but we should start doing something about this because you can. Then the first thing is, what do you do? Actually, some people will say the first question is always why. But the why we've kind of addressed earlier and the aspect of productivity benefits and what have you. So what do you do? And that has to be an assessment of what are the pockets of opportunity in your business. And so I think the first thing to do is to somehow, you don't have to use this model, but basically try to score this on what value does a solution deliver and what complexity does it have? Complexity defined as all these different factors. It's expensive, it takes a long time, it has risk associated with it. And then you take all of the different, I've only mentioned 4 here. In your business, you'll have 500 potential use cases. And so how do you decide which one to do? And that's why you do this kind of scoring. You can score it, say, from 1 to 5. And so you get an assessment internally, which allows you to position it up here and say, top quadrant is the ones we're going to focus on because they have most significant impact. Or we want to set an example in our business, so let's start with something that has low complexity, so it's easy to do, but high value, right? This is something you have to do now because we keep talking, we keep searching. The jewels to what you do with this is in your business, it's not outside your business. The second thing is, who should do this? Who is responsible? And that first requires us to understand how this operates. You know this. Artificial intelligence is not something that only sits in finance or only sits in sales just because they happen to be the first to use this. Artificial intelligence is a governance topic that spans everybody. So the long-term situation is that every business executive in your organization needs to be AI knowledgeable. Because if it matters for their business, they have to know what they can do with this and the potential for evolving in the future. There are, however, also opportunities to say, well, to start, shouldn't I place it with somebody? Shouldn't somebody own the responsibility to coordinate this? Right? And the operative word here is coordinate. They don't own it. They don't have necessarily the entire budget. And that could be a scenario, which is why in some corners of the world, possibly even also here in Turkey, there's talk about should we have a chief AI officer? And personally, I would say it's a possible scenario. But it is a scenario that is only time-boxed, because at some stage you can't have somebody that solely owns something without actually getting everybody else involved. And the cultural dynamics don't necessarily work long-term. That is why, in some instances, chief digital officers ran into issues 10 or 15 years ago because the governance rules between different executives weren't worked out really well. So work out governance, but also think about, should there be somebody that is responsible for this so that we can accelerate it? So those are the two things I'd recommend you to do. So we've touched on 3 areas. Where is this going? What should you focus on? The 5 things right now with a basis of benchmarking. And then 2 things you have to go back and do tomorrow morning, which is start a team that does use cases and start to consider who is going to be responsible for this. Usually what I do is use an old Romanian proverb that says, tell the truth and get out of town. I have told the truth. I will actually stay in town because I do want to do some sightseeing. But the thing I can wish you is may the digital force be with you in whatever you do. Thank you.